Hi, welcome back to Kingdom Moving. Yes, God is building children. Mm. He chose David, his servant, took him from the sheep pens. From tending the sheep, he brought him to be the shepherd of his people, Jacob of Israel, his inheritance, and David shepherded them with integrity of heart. With skillful hands, he led them. Sound good, don't it? Yes. Listen, dear friends, to God's truth. Bend your ears to what I tell you. I'm chewing on a morsel of a proverb. I'll let you in on a sweet old truth. Stories we heard from our fathers. Counsels we learned at our mother's knee. We're not keeping this to ourselves. We're passing it along to the next generation. God's fame and fortune, the marvelous things he has done. He planted a witness in Jacob, set his word firmly in Israel, then commanded our parents to teach it to their children, so the next generation would know. And all the generations to come know the truth and tell the stories, so their children can trust God. Never forget the works of God, but keep his commands to the letter. Heaven forbid that they should be their parents, bull-headed and bad, a fickle and faithless bunch who never stayed true to God. The Ephraimites, armed to the teeth, ran off with the battle began. They were cowards to God's covenant, refused to walk by his word. They forgot what he had done, marvels he had done right before their eyes. He performed miracles in plain sight of their parents. In Egypt, out on the fields of Zoan, he split the sea and they walked right through it. He piled the waters to the right and the left. He led them by day with a cloud, led them all the night long with a fiery torch. He split rocks in the wilderness, gave them all they could drink from underground springs. He made creeks flow out of from sheer rock and water pour out like a river. All they did was sin even more, rebelled in a desert against the high God. They tried to get their own way with God, clamored for favors, for special attention. They whined like spoiled children. Why can't God give us a decent meal in this desert? Sure, he struck the rock and the water flowed, creeks cascade from the rock. But how about some fresh baked bread? How about a nice cut of meat? You're ungrateful. When God heard that, he was furious. His anger fled against Jacob. He lost his temper with Israel. It was clear they didn't believe God, had no intentions of trusting in his help. But God helped them anyway, commanded the clouds and gave orders that opened the gates of heaven. He rained down showers of manna to eat. He gave them the bread of heaven. They ate the bread of the mighty angels. He sent them all the food they could eat. He let east winds break loose from the skies, gave a strong push to south winds. This time it was birds that rained down, succulent birds and abundance of birds. He aimed them right for the center of their camp. All round their tents were birds. They ate and they had their fill. He handed them everything they craved on a platter, but their greed knew no bounds. They stuffed their mouths with more and more. Finally, God was fed up. His anger erupted He cut down the brightest and the best. He laid low Israel's finest young men. All, all of them. And can you believe it? They kept right on sinning. All those wonders, and they still wouldn't believe. So their lives wasted away to nothing. Nothing to show for their lives but a ghost town. When he cut them down, they came running for help. They turned and pleaded for mercy. They gave witness that God was their rock, that high God was their redeemer. But they didn't mean a word of it. They lied through their teeth the whole time. They could not have cared less about him, wanted nothing to do with his covenant. And God, compassion, forgave the sin, didn't destroy. Over and over he reigned in his anger, restrained his considerable wrath. He knew what they were made of. He knew there wasn't much to them. How often in the desert they had spurned him, tried his patience in those wilderness years. Time and again they pushed him to the limit, provoked Israel, holy God. How quickly they forgot what he'd done, forgot their day of rescue from the enemy when he did miracles in Egypt, wonders on the plain of Zoan. He turned a river and its streams to blood, not to drop off water to fit to drink. He sent flies which ate them alive, and frogs which drove them crazy. He turned their harvest over to caterpillars, everything they had worked for to the locusts. He flattened their grapevines with hail. Hey. A killing frost ruined their orchards. He pounded their cattle with hail, let thunderbolts loose on their herds. His anger flared. A wild firestorm of havoc and an advance guard of disease-carrying angels to clear the ground, preparing the way before him. He didn't spare those people. He let the plague range through their lives. He killed all the Egyptian firstborn, lusty infants, offsprings, and Ham's fertility. Then he led his people out like sheep, took his flock safely through the wilderness. He took good care of them. They had nothing to fear. The sea took care of their enemies for good. He brought them into his holy land. This mountain he claimed for his own. He scattered everyone who got in their way. He staked out an inheritance for them. The tribes of Israel all had their own places. But they kept on giving him a hard time, rebelled against God, the high God, refused to do anything he told them. They were worse, if that's possible, than their parents. Traitors, crooked as a corkscrew. Their pagan orgies provoked God's anger. Their obscene idolatries broke his heart. When God heard this carrying on, he was furious. He posted a huge no over Israel. He walked off and left Shiloh empty, abandoned the shrines where he had met with Israel. He let his pride and joy go to the dogs, turned his back on the pride of his life. He turned them loose on the fields of battle. Angry, he let them fend for themselves. Their young men went to war and never came back. Their young women waited in vain. Their priests were massacred, and their widows never shed a tear. Suddenly the Lord was up on his feet, like someone roused from deep sleep, shouting like a drunken warrior. He hit his enemies hard, sent them running, yelping, not daring to look back. He disqualified Joseph as leader. told Ephraim if it didn't have what it takes, and chose the tribe of Judah instead. Mount Zion, which he loved so much. He built his sanctuary there, replented, solid, and lasting as the earth itself. Then he chose David, his servant, handpicked him from his work in the sheep pens. One day he was caring for the ewes and those and their lambs. The next day God had him shepherding Jacob, his people, Israel, his prized possession. His good heart made him a good shepherd. He guided the people wisely and well. I want you to know your history, where you come from, your ancestors, and how they were bullheaded and they did not listen to God, and where it got them from generation. Know who you are. When you come here, I'm going to tell you who you are, where you come from and where you're going. God said so. Children, listen. Know who God is. He talking to you. He love you. Pray. Call on him. You're going to know who you are every time you come here. Subscribe so you can learn about yourself each and every time. God love you. Be at peace.